I mean, it's kind of commonly regarded that environmentalism is it's a phenomenon that's generally occurs among privileged, educated classes. And what I'm curious is if in a lot of these countries where you see exploitation of natural resources, does there exist any sort of grassroots, local social movement to advance the environmentalist cause? Or is this something that is kind of unique to the West?
Maybe I can jump in really quick. I mean, I think this is exactly the challenge. We in the Western world as advocates have the resources and tools to get this information out there and to cause a stir. What we are seeing, though, which is a hopeful sign, is that there's more recognition that capacity needs to be built for groups in country to be able to push for changes that sort of meet their own traditions rather than us sort of finding a solution and imposing it on them. So things like Publish What You Pay, the law that I was talking about that was passed in the US, that's a global movement. There are Publish What You Pay chapters in many, and I think most African countries. And those are local-led movements that are seeking the same thing, revenue transparency. So in that regard, I think we're starting to see more recognition that solutions need to be developed locally, and that we in the West can help in capacity building for those.
Yeah, I think that environmentalism is a luxury when you think of environmentalism as being merely people not liking the lake on which their vacation home is built, having oil on the surface or something like that. But in all of the stories that we saw, the environmental concerns were directly linked with public health concerns, with livelihood concerns, et cetera. And those are not rich people problems. Those are the problems that people in those communities were experiencing. And I agree. I mean, I think the challenge is having a legal framework and a system in which people in these communities have a chance at raising these issues, and they are social justice issues, and raising them and making their case and having that case be heard, dealt with fairly, and the results of that fair dealing implemented.
Question over here.
Two questions, if I may, one large and one quick. The first question has to do with the fact that in addition to all the things that you are commenting here about transparency, governance, legalizing frameworks, supporting governments, doesn't it make sense to start thinking in the meantime until all of these things are solved, which are going to be taking very long time because you have layers of environmental, social, political elements, individual and combined, to start thinking on how these illegal activities that are directly affecting the environment, if we teach good practices on how to do this, the artisanal extraction, these people can, in some way, somehow, slow down the destruction that is happening at the moment. Because if we wait until we all deciding to buy gold, certified gold, or all the things that we are doing here, I think that when we open our eyes, we are not going to find forest absolutely anywhere. So I think that the idea of bringing the good practices that we all know in the Western world on how do you do this kind of thing without the destruction, I think that can help us, to bring somewhat, this dynamic going forward, along with all the different things that we are having. I think that for Steve and for Nadja, you who are closer and you are there, a clear question would be, the problem, the environmental problems, it is because it's illegal, the mining is illegal, or it is because they don't know how to do it differently and they have done it all the time. That is the one question. And the other question for the Pulitzer Center, or comment rather, it is sort of to encourage somewhat what Stephen was saying about good practices as well. Because I think that to bring in these documentaries, as great as they are, it leaves us so powerless because we say then, what happened? What do we do next? So I think that the good examples also, I think that bring also awareness and to stretch good practices.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, thoughts on that? Or?
Excuse me. Well, in terms of the environmental devastation caused by the mining, they're using probably the most efficient and cheap methods of extracting the gold as possible. A lot of these people who come to do this work are coming from, backgrounds where they don't really have a lot of money. These operations are kind of quick hit and run type operations, so they're not going to invest a lot in heavy equipment and best practices and all those types of things. So I think that's why you see so much environmental devastation. In terms of what people are doing, I think, and this sort of relates to that gentleman's question about are there groups within these countries that are already working towards helping stop some of these problems. There are a lot of civil society groups in Peru that are pretty mature, that have been there for a while, that are working on these issues. They are connected with US-based environmental organizations. You might be surprised if you search some US environmental organizations that they are doing capacity building with Peruvian groups. Part of the reason the 20,000 people have moved into that region to look for gold is they had to leave their farms and their agricultural land because they were not making enough money. There were problems there. They left. I saw some interesting programs. One was helping them grow papaya. So they gave a couple farmers a test small area to grow papaya, and within the first year he was already making more money than when he was a miner. And he was making 10 times that amount of money. So there are other avenues, I think, for some of these miners, not just training miners to be better or safer at what they do, but also looking for real sustainable alternatives to helping people earn a living.
I've found that by talking to medium-scale miners in Colombia, they're actually a lot more amenable to adopting environmental regulations than I would have thought originally. And I think that Steve is absolutely right. Excuse me, they simply don't they don't have the resources. I don't know if I can make this. All right. Yeah, sorry, I don't think I can. I don't think I'm going to be able to continue this thought. Sorry.
We'll come back. We'll come back. Another question here.
Hi. First, just want to thank you all for your work and for the presentations tonight. And this question is for Amol or perhaps also Dan. You talked about needing to be creative advocates, and so I'm wondering if you have thought of any ways in which the conflict minerals provision of the Dodd-Frank Act could be used or applied in some way to other countries, like Colombia, for example.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I think it's interesting when we talk about country-specific solutions like conflict minerals, which deals with the Congo and surrounding areas, and then as the gentleman mentioned earlier, that Guatemala is facing similar challenges, and as Mehra mentioned just now, there are challenges in Colombia as well. So what we are trying to do with my organization at ICAR is take a step back and think about whether or not a systemic solution can be made to these problems. So looking at concepts of due diligence, which are already enshrined in our corporate law structures, and maybe we can take those concepts and apply them to the environmental and social realm. So human rights due diligence, requiring companies to think about the risks associated with their investments and to disclose those risks across the board, not just to a geographic region. This is going to be a heavy lift, especially in this economic time and with the current composition of Congress. But this is creative advocacy, and this is thinking about solutions that are born from the successes we have achieved, like Publish What You Pay and 1502 conflict minerals, and thinking about ways to address larger situations occurring across the world. And I'll pass it to Dan, who might have some additional comments. Creative advocacy.
Yeah, I have to be careful about about how I publicly weigh in on globalizing Dodd-Frank. I think we are in a more broadly. I think we're in a kind of experimental mode of figuring out how to deal with several coinciding phenomena. One is the rise of the power of corporations. Another is the decline of the power of states, which creates both more and more transnational governance challenges with respect to corporations, and also a decline of what has been our traditional tool for dealing with governance challenges. And so, yes, there are still opportunities for pieces of legislation that can have effect beyond borders by requiring transparency, et cetera. But I think we also have to think creatively about new modes of governance. And so you see, I think, without a clear shining example of success yet, but you see experiments with multi-stakeholder initiatives that involve, non-regulatory, but trying to get public, transparent commitments to certain practices, et cetera. The voluntary principles on security and human rights are an example, and Colombia is actually involved in this, where a bunch of companies have signed up to certain principles to guide their interaction with public and private security forces, and that's an effort that involves government, civil society, and companies and their commitments around the world. Things like that are other ways that we're experimenting in global governance without global government, and I think the jury's out on all of these in many respects, but certainly something will emerge to fill what is, unavoidably or undeniably a gap or a challenge in terms of making sure that there are rules of the road and that people are protected.